The rancher's finger tightened on the trigger, aiming at the woman's chest. She didn't flinch. Blood crusted her split knuckles, snow-caked her torn coat, and those steel-gray eyes dared him to pull. "Shoot me or feed me," she said. "I'm too tired for anything in between." That was the moment Silas Mercer's frozen heart cracked open, and the moment everything in the valley started to burn. This is a story about survival, revenge, and two broken people who became each other's salvation. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wind screamed like something dying. Silas Mercer sat in his kitchen with a bottle of whiskey and a loaded rifle across his lap, listening to the storm tear apart what was left of Wyoming. 3 days the blizzard had raged. 3 days of white hell that buried fences, collapsed the north pasture gate, and killed 2 of his cattle stupid enough to wander into the open. The house groaned under the weight of ice. The windows rattled. Everything felt like it was coming apart. He poured another drink and didn't bother with the glass. The ranch had been dying long before the storm hit. Hell, it had been dying since the day he buried Sarah 3 winters back. Cancer took her slow and mean, turning the woman he loved into a skeleton that barely recognized his face by the end. After the funeral, Silas had locked himself inside this house and let everything rot. The fences sagged, the barn leaked. Weeds choked the garden Sarah used to tend every morning before sunrise. He fired the ranch hands one by one until nobody was left but him and the ghosts. People in town whispered about him now. Crazy old Silas? Lost his mind when he lost his wife, won't talk to nobody, just drinks and waits to die. They weren't wrong. He was 52 years old and felt like 80. His hands shook when he tried to fix anything. His shoulder ached from an old riding injury that never healed right. Most days he woke up hoping he wouldn't, and most nights he drank until the memories stopped clawing at his skull. The storm didn't care about any of that. It just kept coming. Silas stood and walked to the window, squinting through the frost-covered glass at the white chaos outside. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. The barn was a dark shadow barely visible through the sheets of snow. He'd reinforced the doors yesterday, knowing if they blew open, the horses would freeze before morning. Not that he had many horses left, just 2, an aging mare named Lacey and a temperamental gelding he should have sold years ago. He turned away from the window and nearly knocked over the whiskey bottle. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind. 3 heavy knocks on the front door. Silas froze. His hand instinctively reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody sane, anyway. The nearest ranch was 8 miles south, and the town of Ridgemont was 12 miles east on roads that were probably buried under 4 feet of snow by now. The knocking came again, louder this time, more desperate. He grabbed the rifle, checked the chamber, and moved toward the door. His heart hammered against his ribs. Could be an animal, could be a tree branch blown against the wood, could be his whiskey-soaked brain playing tricks, or it could be something worse. "Who's there?" he called out. No answer, just the wind. Silas unlocked the door and yanked it open, rifle raised. A woman stood on his porch. Not a small woman, not delicate or dainty or any of those words men usually used. She was big, tall, broad-shouldered, built like someone who'd spent their whole life doing hard labor. Her coat was torn in 3 places, crusted with ice and snow. Her dark hair hung in frozen clumps around a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Blood streaked her knuckles. Her boots were wrapped in rags. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Silver gray. Unflinching. Staring straight down the barrel of his rifle like it was nothing more than a pointed finger. "Shoot me or feed me," she said, voice hoarse and flat. "I'm too tired for anything in between." Silas blinked. His finger hovered near the trigger. "Who the hell are you?" "Does it matter?" "Yeah, it does." The woman swayed slightly, catching herself against the doorframe. "Name's Evelyn Hart. I've been walking for 2 days, haven't eaten in 3. If you're not going to shoot me, I'd appreciate getting out of this cold before my feet fall off." Silas didn't lower the rifle. "Where'd you come from?" "North." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting tonight." She pushed past him into the house, moving slow and stiff like her joints had frozen solid. Silas spun around, rifle still raised, but she ignored him completely. She walked straight to the fireplace, knelt down in front of the dying embers, and held her ruined hands toward the faint heat. "You can't just—" Silas started. I already did. Evelyn didn't look at him. You gonna shoot me or not? Because if you are, get it over with. I don't have the energy to argue. Silas stood there like an idiot, rifle shaking in his hands. Part of him wanted to throw her back out into the storm. This was his house, his grief, his isolation. He didn't want some stranger bleeding all over Sarah's floor. But another part of him, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be human, couldn't do it. He lowered the rifle. You got 5 minutes to warm up, he said. Then you're gone. Evelyn almost smiled. Sure. She didn't move. Silas cursed under his breath and slammed the door shut against the wind. Snow had already blown halfway across the floor. He locked the door, set the rifle down, and turned to stare at the woman kneeling by his fireplace. Up close, she looked worse. Her face was pale beneath the dirt and frostbite. Her hands trembled as she held them toward the fire. Dark circles ringed her eyes like bruises. She'd been through hell, that much was obvious. When's the last time you ate? He asked, hating himself for caring. Tuesday, maybe. Lost track. Today's Friday. Then it's been a while. Silas rubbed his face. There's stew on the stove, couple days old, but it's still good. Evelyn finally looked at him. Those steel gray eyes studied his face like she was reading a book written in scars. Why? Why what? Why feed me? You don't know me. I could be dangerous. Silas snorted. Lady, you're half dead and unarmed. I think I'll manage. He walked into the kitchen and ladled cold stew into a chipped bowl. When he came back, Evelyn had moved to the old armchair near the fire. She took the bowl without a word and ate like someone who'd forgotten what food tasted like. No manners, no hesitation, just survival. Silas sat down across from her and poured another drink. So, Evelyn Hart from the north, you running from something? She paused mid-bite. Aren't we all? That's not an answer either. You want honesty? Fine. She set the bowl down and met his eyes. I'm running from a man who tried to kill me. I'm running from a life that broke me into pieces. I'm running because staying still means dying. That honest enough for you? Silas felt something twist in his chest. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror every morning for 3 years. You got a plan? He asked. Keep moving. Find work. Stay alive. Evelyn picked up the bowl again. Same plan as yesterday. In this weather, you won't make it to the main road. I'll manage. You won't. Evelyn's jaw tightened. You offering me a bed, old man? Or just trying to scare me? I'm telling you the truth. Storm's not breaking for another 2 days at least. Road to town's buried. You go back out there tonight, you'll be dead by morning. Maybe that's fine. Bullshit. She looked up sharply. Silas held her gaze. If you wanted to die, you would have laid down in the snow hours ago, he said. But you didn't. You dragged yourself through a blizzard to knock on a stranger's door. That's not someone who's given up. That's someone who's still fighting. Evelyn's expression cracked just slightly. For a moment, she looked less like a stone wall and more like a woman who'd been carrying too much weight for too long. 2 weeks, she said quietly. What? Give me 2 weeks. Let me work. I'll fix your fences, tend your animals, cook your meals. When the road's clear, I'll leave. You'll never see me again. Silas opened his mouth to refuse. This was insane. He didn't know this woman, didn't trust her, didn't want anyone in his house reminding him that life kept moving even after Sarah stopped breathing. But the words that came out were different. 2 weeks. Then you're gone. Evelyn nodded. Deal. They sat in silence while the fire crackled and the wind howled. Silas finished his drink and wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. Evelyn finished her stew and stared into the flames like she was watching ghosts dance. Neither of them slept much that night. By sunrise, Silas woke to the smell of coffee. Real coffee. Not the burnt swill he'd been choking down for months, but the kind Sarah used to make. Strong, bitter, perfect. He stumbled out of bed, shoulder aching, head pounding from too much whiskey, and found Evelyn Hart standing in his kitchen like she'd been there her whole life. She'd cleaned, the dishes were washed, the floor was swept, the stove actually looked like it worked again. Morning, she said without looking up from the pan where bacon sizzled. Silas stared. What are you doing? Earning my keep. I didn't ask you to keep. You gave me a roof. I'm giving you breakfast. That's how deals work. She slid 2 pieces of bacon onto a plate. added eggs, and handed it to him. Eat. He took the plate mechanically and sat down at the table. The food tasted better than anything he'd eaten in years. He hated that. Hated how good it felt to have someone else in the kitchen. Hated how the house suddenly felt less like a tomb. Storm's letting up, Evelyn said, pouring herself coffee. I checked the barn. Your mare's got a bad hoof. Needs cleaning and wrapping. The gelding's fine, just hungry. Hay supply's low. I know. Feed'll last maybe another week if we ration it. I said I know. Evelyn sat down across from him. You planning to do anything about it, or just wait for everything to fall apart? Silas's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, really looked. This woman who'd shown up half dead on his porch was now sitting in his kitchen telling him how to run his ranch. You got a lot of nerve, he said slowly. I've got 2 working hands and nothing to lose. That's better than nerve. This ain't your ranch. No, but for the next 2 weeks, it's where I'm living, and I don't plan to freeze or starve because you're too drunk to give a damn. The words hit like a punch. Silas's jaw clenched. His fingers tightened around the fork. Part of him wanted to throw her out right then. Part of him knew she was right. He set the fork down carefully. The fences. What about them? North pasture fence is down. South gate's barely standing. If you're so eager to work, start there. Evelyn stood. Tools? Barn. Left side. Should be wire and post somewhere. She nodded and headed for the door, pulling on her torn coat. Silas watched her go, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. Not at her. At himself. Because Evelyn Hart had been in his house less than 12 hours, and already she'd done more than he'd managed in 3 years. The next few days passed in a blur of work and silence. Evelyn repaired the north fence, replaced 3 rotted posts, and patched the barn roof where snow had started leaking through. She moved like someone who'd been doing ranch work her entire life. Efficient, strong, relentless. Silas watched her from the porch, whiskey in hand, telling himself he didn't care. But he did. She didn't complain, didn't ask for help, didn't expect gratitude. She just worked from sunup to sundown, ate whatever he put in front of her, and slept in the spare room without a word. On the 4th day, Silas found her in the barn treating Lacey's infected hoof. The mare stood calm while Evelyn cleaned the wound with steady hands. Where'd you learn to do that? He asked from the doorway. Evelyn didn't look up. Worked on a ranch once, long time ago. Where? Montana. Husband owned it. Husband? She paused. Yeah. He the one you're running from? Her hands stilled. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, he's dead now. The way she said it made Silas's skin crawl. Not sad, not relieved, just flat, like she was stating a fact about the weather. You kill him? He asked quietly. Evelyn looked at him then. Those steel gray eyes were cold and empty. Does it matter? Might. Why? You scared of me now? Silas stepped into the barn. Should I be? Evelyn stood slowly, wiping her hands on a rag. I spent 8 years married to a man who beat me every time he had a bad day. I spent 8 years being told I was worthless, stupid, ugly, good for nothing but cooking and cleaning and keeping my mouth shut. I spent 8 years praying someone would save me. She took a step closer. Nobody did. So I saved myself. Silas's throat felt tight. How? However, I had to. They stared at each other in the dim barn light. Wind rattled the walls. Lacey shifted in her stall. I ain't asking you to leave, Silas said finally. I know. But if you bring trouble to my door, she may... I won't. How can you be sure? Evelyn's expression softened just slightly. Because the only people looking for me think I'm already dead, and I plan to keep it that way. Silas nodded slowly. He didn't know if he believed her, didn't know if it mattered. All he knew was that, for the first time in 3 years, his ranch felt like it was breathing again. 2 weeks, he reminded her. 2 weeks, she agreed. But they both knew it was a lie. On the 8th day, they went into town. The storm had finally broken, leaving the valley buried under snow that sparkled like broken glass in the sunlight. The road to Ridgemont was barely passable, but Silas needed supplies and Evelyn insisted on coming along. You don't need to, he started. I'm going. She climbed onto the wagon seat beside him. Sitting in that house another day'll drive me crazy. Silas didn't argue. They rode in silence through the frozen landscape, past abandoned homesteads and snow-covered fields. The town appeared on the horizon like a cluster of wounded animals huddled together for warmth. Ridgemont wasn't much. A main street lined with weathered buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple. Maybe 300 people lived there year-round, most of them ranchers or farmers struggling to survive Wyoming's brutal winters. Silas pulled the wagon up outside Hendrick's general store and climbed down stiffly. His shoulder throbbed. Evelyn jumped down beside him, moving easier now that her frostbite had healed. Inside the store, old William Hendricks looked up from behind the counter and froze. Silas Mercer. His voice was wary. Didn't expect to see you. Need supplies, Silas said curtly. Sure, like... Hendrick's eyes shifted to Evelyn. Who's your friend? Nobody. Silas moved down the aisle, grabbing canned goods and flour. Just hired help. Hired help? Hendricks didn't sound convinced. Didn't know you were hiring again. Well, now you do. Evelyn picked up a sack of oats and carried it to the counter. Hendricks stared at her like she was some kind of exotic animal. She ignored him completely. They were loading the wagon when trouble arrived. 3 men on horseback rode down the main street, dressed in expensive coats and carrying rifles like decorations. The one in front was young, maybe 30, with blonde hair and a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't twisted into a permanent sneer. Garrett Crowley. Silas's stomach turned to ice. The Crowleys owned half the valley, ran cattle on land their grandfather stole during the territorial days. They controlled the sheriff, the water rights, and most of the politicians in the county. Garrett was the eldest son, spoiled, cruel, and mean as a snake. He reined his horse to a stop in front of Silas's wagon. Well, Silas Mercer, thought you died. Not yet, Silas said flatly. Garrett's eyes slid to Evelyn. Who's the big girl? Silas's jaw clenched. None of your business. Everything in this valley's my business, old man. Garrett circled his horse closer, studying Evelyn like she was livestock. You're new. Where you from? Evelyn met his eyes. Nowhere that concerns you. Garrett's smile widened. Got a mouth on her. I like that. Silas stepped between them. We're done here. I'll say when you're done. Garrett leaned forward in his saddle. You know, Mercer, I heard about your wife. Shame what happened. Cancer, wasn't it? Get out of my way. Must have been hard, watching her waste away like that. Bet she didn't even recognize you by the end. Silas's hand moved toward his rifle, but Evelyn caught his wrist. Her grip was iron. Not worth it, she said quietly. Garrett laughed. Listen to your woman, Mercer. She's got more sense than you do. He spurred his horse and rode off down the street, his brothers following. Silas stood there shaking, rage boiling in his veins. Evelyn released his wrist. Who was that? She asked. Garrett Crowley, richest, meanest son of a bitch in the territory. He always that charming? That was him being friendly. Evelyn watched the riders disappear around a corner. Something dark passed over her face. Men like that don't change. I know. They just get worse. Silas looked at her. You know his type? Better than you'd think. She climbed onto the wagon seat. Let's go home. The word home hung in the air between them like smoke. Neither acknowledged it. They just rode back to the ranch in silence while the sun sank behind the mountains and shadows stretched across the snow. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle. His shoulder ached. His head throbbed. But mostly, he couldn't stop thinking about the way Evelyn had looked at Garrett Crowley, like she'd seen a ghost. Around midnight, he gave up and went to the kitchen for water. That's where he found her, sitting at the table in the dark, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. Can't sleep? He asked. She shook her head. Silas sat down across from her. For a while, neither of them spoke. My husband looked like him, Evelyn said finally. Garrett. Same smile, same eyes, same way of talking like the world owed him everything. Your husband was rich? His father was. Owned land in Montana, thousands of acres. My husband inherited it all when the old man died. How'd you end up with him? Evelyn's laugh was bitter. I was young and stupid. Thought marriage meant safety. Thought a big house and a ring meant I'd never be hungry again. Took me 3 months to realize I'd traded hunger for something worse. He beat you every day. Sometimes for burning dinner, sometimes for looking at him wrong, sometimes for nothing at all. Her fingers tightened around the cup. I tried leaving once, made it to town. He found me, dragged me back, broke my arm in 3 places. After that, I stopped trying. Silas felt sick. What changed? He got drunk one night, meaner than usual, came at me with a fireplace poker. Evelyn looked up, eyes haunted. I grabbed a kitchen knife, told him if he touched me again, I'd kill him. He laughed, said I didn't have the guts. What happened? I proved him wrong. The words hung in the air like a confession. Silas didn't move, didn't breathe. Self-defense, Evelyn continued quietly, but his family didn't see it that way. They had money, connections, power. The sheriff was their cousin, the judge was their friend. I ran that night and kept running, changed my name, changed my hair, changed everything, been moving ever since. How long? 14 months. Silas ran a hand over his face. You think they're still looking? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark. All I know is I can't stop. The second I stop, they'll find me. You stopped here. For 2 weeks. Evelyn, don't. She turned to face him. Don't ask me to stay. Don't make this harder than it already is. Silas stood slowly. What if I want you to stay? Why? Because this ranch has been dead for 3 years. Because you brought it back to life. Because... He stopped, struggling for words. Because I forgot what it feels like to wake up and not want to die. Evelyn's eyes glistened. Silas? I ain't asking you to love me. I ain't asking for anything but help. This place is too big for one person. Too broken. But together. He swallowed hard. Together, maybe we could fix it. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she walked past him toward the hallway. 2 weeks, she said without looking back. That's all I can promise. Silas listened to her footsteps fade. He stood alone in the dark kitchen, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the best decision he'd ever make. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering everything in white. And somewhere in the valley, Garrett Crowley was already planning his next move. The 2 weeks came and went like water through a sieve. Evelyn didn't leave. She didn't talk about leaving either. She just kept working, repairing, organizing, transforming the dying ranch into something that resembled a functioning operation again. Silas watched her from a distance, half afraid that if he said anything, she'd vanish like smoke. The morning routines became familiar. Coffee before dawn. Evelyn checking the animals while Silas tried to stretch the stiffness from his bad shoulder. Breakfast eaten in comfortable silence. Then work until sundown, both of them moving around each other like dancers who'd learned the steps without rehearsing. But the valley was watching. Silas felt it every time they went to town. The stares, the whispers, old women clutching their shawls and muttering behind their hands, men stepping aside when Evelyn walked past, eyes lingering too long on her broad shoulders and scarred hands. She ain't natural, he heard someone say outside the feed store one afternoon. Woman that big? That strong? Something wrong with her. Silas had clenched his fists and kept walking. Evelyn pretended not to hear. It was late March when the rumors started getting teeth. Silas was shoeing the gelding in the barn when Walter Boone rode up, an elderly rancher who'd been friends with Sarah's father back when the world made sense. Walter dismounted slow, joints creaking, and hobbled into the barn with his cane. Silas. Walter. Silas didn't look up from the horse's hoof. What brings you out here? Needed to talk, man to man. Something in Walter's tone made Silas set down his tools. About what? Walter leaned against a post, wheezing slightly. About the woman you're keeping. I ain't keeping anyone. Evelyn works here. That what you call it? Walter's expression was grim. Because Garrett Crowley's telling a different story. Silas's jaw tightened. What's he saying? Says she's a wanted criminal. Says authorities up in Montana are looking for a woman matching her description. Big, dark hair, scar on her left hand. Walter paused. Says she killed her husband and stole his money before running south. That's horseshit. Is it? Walter's eyes were sharp despite his age. Because I've known you 20 years, Silas, and I've never seen you take in a stranger, especially not some woman who shows up in the middle of a blizzard with no explanation. Silas felt his temper rising. What Evelyn did before she got here ain't my business. It is when the sheriff starts asking questions. Sheriff Drummond's in Garrett's pocket, has been for years. Don't matter whose pocket he's in, law's still law. Walter shifted his weight. Look, I ain't saying she's guilty, but you need to be careful. Garrett's been circling like a vulture, and you know he don't do nothing without a reason. Silas rubbed his face. What's he want? Same thing he always wants, power, control. Your land. Walter lowered his voice. Word is he's planning something, don't know what yet. But when Garrett Crowley starts spreading stories about a person, that person usually ends up hurt or gone. After Walter left, Silas stood in the barn for a long time, staring at nothing. His mind churned through possibilities, each one worse than the last. He wanted to trust Evelyn, wanted to believe her version of events. But doubt was a poison that spread fast once it started. That evening, he found her in the garden behind the house, turning soil that hadn't been touched in 3 years. She'd cleared away the dead plants, rebuilt the broken fence, and somehow coaxed new growth from the frozen earth. We need to talk, he said. Evelyn straightened, wiping dirt from her hands. About? Garrett's spreading rumors, says you're wanted for murder. Her expression didn't change. And? And I need to know if it's true. I already told you what happened. You told me you killed your husband in self-defense. You didn't mention stealing money or being wanted by the law. Evelyn's eyes went cold. Because I didn't steal anything, and the only people who want me are his family, not the law. They tried to buy the sheriff, tried to fabricate charges, but there was never an official warrant. I checked before I ran. How do I know that's true? You don't. She dropped the spade and faced him fully. You want me to leave? Say the word. I'll pack my things and be gone by morning. Silas hesitated. That would be the smart move. The safe move. Let her disappear before Garrett's games turned dangerous. But the thought of this ranch going silent again, of eating alone, working alone, dying alone, felt worse than any risk. I ain't asking you to leave, he said quietly. I'm asking you to be straight with me. Evelyn's shoulders relaxed slightly. Everything I told you was true. My husband was a monster. I killed him because he tried to kill me first. His family wanted revenge, so they tried to twist it into murder. When that didn't work, they spread lies to anyone who'd listen. I've been running ever since because staying means dying. And the money? There was no money. The ranch was mortgaged to hell. His father left debts, not fortune. I left with the clothes on my back and nothing else. Silas studied her face, looking for tells, for cracks in the story, but all he saw was exhaustion and truth. All right, he said finally. All right? I believe you. Evelyn blinked. Just like that? Just like that. He turned to head back inside, then paused. But Evelyn, if Garrett comes at us, he won't come fair. He'll come dirty and mean, and I need to know you'll fight. She picked up the spade again. I've been fighting my whole life, Silas. I'm not stopping now. That night, Silas lay awake listening to the house settle. Somewhere down the hall, Evelyn was probably doing the same. 2 broken people under one roof, waiting for the hammer to fall. It didn't take long. 4 days later, Silas woke to discover the ranch gate torn off its hinges and dumped in the middle of the road. Nailed to the gatepost was a legal document, yellowed paper covered in official-looking script and sealed with red wax. He read it 3 times, each pass making his blood run colder. According to the document, Sarah Mercer had borrowed $5,000 from Crowley Ranch Incorporated 2 months before she died. The loan was to cover medical expenses. Silas's signature was allegedly on the promissory note as co-borrower. Payment was due in full within 30 days, or the property would be seized to satisfy the debt. Silas's hands shook so badly he almost tore the paper. This was a lie. Had to be. Sarah never borrowed money from the Crowleys. Never would have. She hated that family almost as much as he did, but the signature looked real. The seal looked real. And in 30 days, none of that would matter because Garrett would own a legal document that said the ranch belonged to him. Evelyn found him standing in the road, staring at the notice like it might burst into flames. What is it? She asked. He handed her the paper without speaking, She read it quickly, her expression darkening with each line. "This is fake," she said flatly. "I know. Your wife never signed this." "I know. So we fight it." Silas laughed bitterly. "Fight it how? Garrett owns the sheriff and the judge. Even if we prove it's forged, who's going to rule in our favor? The Crowleys control everything." Evelyn folded the document carefully. "Not everything." "What's that supposed to mean?" It means men like Garrett think they're untouchable. But every powerful man has enemies, people he's hurt, people who'd love to see him fall. She met Silas's eyes. "We find those people. We build a case, and we burn his empire to the ground before he takes your ranch." "You're talking about war." "I'm talking about survival." Her voice was steel. "You want to roll over and let him win? Fine. Sign the ranch away and spend the rest of your life regretting it. But if you want to fight, I'll fight with you. I've already lost everything once. I'm not doing it again." Silas looked at this woman, this stranger who'd stumbled onto his porch half frozen and desperate, and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, impossible hope. "All right," he said. "We fight." Evelyn smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. "Good. Now let's figure out how to kill a Crowley without actually killing him." They spent the next week gathering information like soldiers preparing for battle. Evelyn went to town alone, claiming Silas's presence would raise suspicion. She visited the general store, the saloon, the church. She talked to shopkeepers and stable hands and anyone else who'd listen. What she learned painted a picture darker than either of them expected. Garrett Crowley wasn't just cruel, he was predatory. Over the past 5 years, at least 3 young women had worked at the Crowley estate as housekeepers or cooks. All 3 had left abruptly without explanation. One disappeared entirely. Another showed up at her parents' farm 20 miles away, refusing to speak about what happened. The third married quickly and moved to Colorado, but her sister whispered that she'd been different after working for the Crowleys. Quiet, jumpy, broken. Nobody said the words out loud, but everyone knew. Evelyn also discovered that several smaller ranchers had lost their land to the Crowleys over the years through similar schemes, mysterious debts, forged documents, legal maneuvers nobody could fight. The Crowley empire was built on theft and fear. "There's a girl," Evelyn told Silas one evening, "works at the saloon. Name's Caroline, 16, maybe 17. I saw Garrett corner her in the alley behind the building. She looked terrified." Silas's stomach churned. "You talked to her?" "Tried. She ran." Evelyn stared into her coffee. "But I saw the bruises on her wrists. I saw the way she flinched when men got too close. I know what that looks like. We can't help everyone." "Maybe not, but we can help her." Silas wanted to argue, wanted to say they had enough problems without adding more, but he looked at Evelyn's face and saw someone who understood what it meant to be helpless and alone. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Find out if there are others. Get them to talk. Use their testimony to bury Garrett so deep he never crawls out." "That's a long shot." "Better than doing nothing." Silas couldn't argue with that. 2 days later, Evelyn brought Caroline to the ranch. The girl was small, thin, with mousy brown hair and eyes that darted around like a trapped animal's. She sat in the kitchen wringing her hands while Evelyn made tea. "You're safe here," Evelyn said gently. "Nobody's going to hurt you." Caroline's voice was barely a whisper. "He'll find out I talked." "Not if we're careful." "You don't understand. The Crowleys, they own everything. The law, the land, the people. You can't fight them." "We can try." Evelyn sat down across from her. "But we need your help. We need to know what happened." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. He hurt me. For months. Said if I told anyone, he'd make sure my family lost their farm. Said nobody would believe me anyway because his word was law." "What did he do?" Silas asked from the doorway. Caroline flinched. Evelyn shot him a warning look. "You don't have to—" Evelyn started. "He forced himself on me," Caroline said, voice cracking. "Multiple times, in the storage room behind the saloon, sometimes at the estate when I brought laundry. He said I should feel honored, that most girls would kill for his attention." Silas felt rage boiling in his veins. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. "Were there others?" Evelyn asked softly. Caroline nodded. 2 girls I know for sure. Maybe more. But we're all too scared to say anything. His father controls the sheriff. The judge is his uncle. Even the priest won't speak against them. What if you weren't alone? Evelyn leaned forward. What if other girls came forward? What if we brought in federal law? Federal? Caroline looked up, hope flickering. Like a marshal? Exactly like a marshal, someone the Crowleys can't buy or threaten. You think that would work? I think it's worth trying. Evelyn took Caroline's hand. But we need evidence, testimony, proof that Garrett's been doing this for years. Caroline was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened her spine, just slightly, but enough. There's another girl, Emma Pritchard. She worked at the estate last year. Left suddenly, won't talk about why. But I know she was different after. If anyone would testify, it'd be her. Where is she now? Living with her aunt on the east side of town. Works at the bakery. Evelyn squeezed Caroline's hand. Thank you for being brave. I'm not brave, Caroline whispered. I'm just tired of being scared. After Caroline left, Silas paced the kitchen like a caged animal. His shoulder throbbed. His head pounded. Every cell in his body screamed for violence. I want to kill him, he said quietly. I know. I want to ride to his ranch right now and put a bullet through his skull. I know. Evelyn stood. But that's not how we win. We win by destroying everything he's built. By making sure he spends the rest of his life in a cage, knowing he lost to people he thought were beneath him. Silas stopped pacing. You really think we can do this? I think we have to try. He looked at her, this woman who'd appeared out of a blizzard and turned his world upside down. She was strong, stubborn, damaged, and dangerous. Everything he needed and nothing he deserved. Thank you, he said. For what? For giving a damn. About the ranch. About those girls. About... He trailed off, unable to finish. Evelyn's expression softened. You saved my life, Silas. Let me return the favor. That night, neither of them slept. They sat at the kitchen table making plans, building strategies, preparing for a fight that could cost them everything. Outside, spring arrived with tentative warmth. Snow melted, grass pushed through frozen earth. The world kept turning despite the darkness gathering on the horizon. And in his mansion on the hill, Garrett Crowley sharpened his knives and waited for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came 6 days later. Silas was in the barn replacing a broken harness when he smelled smoke. Not wood smoke from the stove, something chemical and wrong. He stepped outside and his heart stopped. The barn was on fire. Flames erupted from the hayloft, crawling up the wooden walls with terrifying speed. Inside, the horses screamed, high, panicked sounds that cut through the roar of the fire. Evelyn! Silas shouted. She appeared from the house, took one look at the inferno, and ran for the water pump. Silas grabbed a bucket and sprinted toward the barn doors. Heat slammed into him like a physical force. Smoke choked his lungs. He could hear Lacey and the gelding thrashing in their stalls, mad with fear. The fire was spreading too fast. In minutes, the whole structure would collapse. Silas tied a wet rag over his face and plunged into the smoke. Visibility was 0. He moved by memory, hands outstretched, coughing so hard he thought his lungs would tear. He found Lacey's stall and threw open the door. The mare bolted past him toward the exit. The gelding was harder, spooked and wild-eyed, refusing to move despite the flames eating through the ceiling above. Silas grabbed the halter and pulled, but the horse reared, knocking him backward. That's when the beam fell. It came down like a falling tree, striking Silas's bad shoulder and pinning him to the ground. Pain exploded through his body. He tried to push it off, but the weight was impossible. Smoke filled his lungs. Fire crept closer. This is it, he thought distantly. This is how I die. Then Evelyn was there. She materialized through the smoke like something mythical, face streaked with ash, eyes blazing. She grabbed the beam with both hands and lifted. Move, she screamed. Silas scrambled backward, dragging himself clear. The beam crashed down where he'd been lying. Evelyn grabbed the gelding's halter and somehow forced the terrified animal toward the door. They stumbled out into the night air seconds before the roof collapsed. The barn folded in on itself with a sound like the world ending. Sparks spiraled into the sky. Heat rolled across the yard in waves. Silas lay on his back in the dirt, gasping, shoulder on fire with pain. Evelyn knelt beside him, hands checking for injuries. "Don't move," she said. "Your shoulder's dislocated." "The horses?" "Safe, both of them." She looked up at the burning barn. "But everything else is gone." Silas followed her gaze. 3 years of work, all the tools, all the feed, all the supplies they'd stockpiled for next winter, burning to ash. "This wasn't an accident," he said through gritted teeth. "I know." "Garrett, I know." A sound made them both turn. 3 riders emerged from the darkness beyond the firelight. Garrett Crowley sat tall in his saddle, flanked by his 2 younger brothers. All 3 wore expressions of cruel satisfaction. Garrett dismounted and walked toward them, boots crunching on the frozen ground. He stopped just outside the circle of heat. "Shame about your barn, Mercer," he said. "Really is. Fires are so unpredictable this time of year." Silas tried to stand, but Evelyn held him down. Her hand on his chest was the only thing keeping him from charging forward and getting himself killed. "You did this," Silas snarled. "Me? I've been at my ranch all evening. Ask anyone." Garrett's smile widened. "Of course, accidents do happen when people don't pay their debts. And you got, what, 3 weeks left before that promissory note comes due? That note's a forgery." "Prove it." Garrett crouched down to Silas's level. "Here's how this works, old man. You sign over the deed to your land. I tear up the debt. You walk away with your life. Simple. Go to hell. Your choice." Garrett stood and gestured to his brothers. "But next time, it won't be the barn burning. It'll be the house, with your woman inside." He turned to leave, then paused and looked at Evelyn. "You know, sweetheart, you could always come work for me. I'm always looking for strong girls who know how to take orders." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but Silas saw her hand move slowly toward the rifle, leaning against the fence post 10 feet away. "I'd rather die," she said flatly. Garrett laughed. "That can be arranged too." He mounted his horse, and the 3 brothers rode off into the darkness, leaving Silas and Evelyn surrounded by burning wreckage and smoke. Silas finally managed to sit up, cradling his ruined shoulder. "He's going to kill us." "Not if we kill him first." Evelyn retrieved the rifle and checked the chamber. Her hands were rock steady. "I'm done running, Silas. I'm done being afraid. If Garrett wants a war, we'll give him one. We can't fight the Crowleys alone." "We won't be alone." She looked at him with those steel gray eyes. "Tomorrow, we find Emma Pritchard. We get her story. Then we ride to the federal marshal's office in Cheyenne, and we burn Garrett's world down." Silas wanted to argue, wanted to say it was hopeless, that powerful men always won, that they should just run while they still could. But he looked at the burning barn, at everything he'd built with Sarah, now reduced to ash and memory, and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. "All right," he said. "We fight." Evelyn helped him to his feet. His shoulder screamed in protest. Together, they stood in the firelight and watched the last pieces of the barn collapse into glowing coals. The war had begun. And one way or another, blood would answer for blood. Evelyn set Silas's shoulder in the kitchen while he bit down on a leather strap and tried not to scream. She worked quickly, hands steady despite the trembling that came after the fire. When the joint popped back into place, Silas went white and nearly vomited. "Done," she said quietly, wrapping his arm tight against his chest. "Don't move it for a week." "Can't afford a week." "You don't have a choice." She cleaned ash from a cut on his forehead. "That shoulder comes out again. You might lose the arm completely." Silas sat there breathing hard, sweat soaking through his shirt. The kitchen smelled like smoke. Everything smelled like smoke. His clothes, his hair, the walls, the stench of burned hay and wood had seeped into every corner of the house. "We need to leave tonight," he said. "Get to Cheyenne before Garrett realizes what we're doing." "You can barely stand." "Don't matter. He'll come back. You know he will. And next time he won't just burn the barn." Evelyn didn't argue because they both knew he was right. She moved to the window and stared out at the smoldering ruins. The horses stood in the corral, still spooked, eyes rolling white in the darkness. "We need Emma Pritchard first," she said. "Without her testimony, we've got nothing but accusations, and Garrett will bury us in lawyers before we get close to a marshal. So we get her tomorrow. She might not talk. Then we make her understand what's at stake." Silas stood slowly, cradling his bound arm. Those girls deserve justice. Your Caroline deserves justice. And if we don't stop Garrett now, he'll keep hurting people until someone puts a bullet in him. Evelyn turned from the window. Her face was hard in the lamplight. Part of me wants to be the one who pulls that trigger. I know. I've killed before. Told you that. And I'd do it again if it meant stopping men like him. That's not who you are. How do you know? Her voice cracked slightly. You've known me 2 months, Silas. You don't know what I'm capable of. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her, close enough to see the ash streaked across her face, the tears she was fighting back, the exhaustion carved into every line of her body. I know you saved my life tonight, he said. I know you could have run when the fire started, but you stayed. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met, and not because you can lift a barn beam, because you keep fighting even when the world tells you to quit. Evelyn's jaw trembled. I'm tired, Silas. So damn tired. I know, but we're close. We get Emma, we get to Cheyenne, we bring down Garrett, then you can rest. She wiped her eyes roughly. And if we fail? We won't. But if we do? Silas was quiet for a moment. Then we tried. And that's more than most people can say. They stood there in the smoke-stained kitchen while the night pressed against the windows. Outside, embers still glowed in the barn's remains. Tomorrow they'd face Garrett's wrath again. But tonight, for just a few hours, they had each other and a plan. It would have to be enough. Dawn came cold and gray. Silas woke to find Evelyn already dressed, packing supplies into saddlebags. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. Moving hurt, breathing hurt, but he forced himself upright and got dressed one-handed. How's the pain? Evelyn asked without looking up. Manageable. Liar. It'll hold. He watched her work. You really think Emma will talk? I think she's been carrying this weight for a year. Sometimes people just need permission to let it go. They rode into Ridgemont as the sun broke over the mountains. The town was waking up. Shopkeepers sweeping porches, farmers loading wagons, children running through muddy streets. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like the Crowleys weren't poisoning the valley from within. The bakery sat on the east side of town, a small building with flour-dusted windows and the smell of fresh bread drifting from the doorway. Evelyn dismounted and tied her horse. Wait here, she told Silas. Like hell. You walk in there with a busted shoulder and ash all over you, she'll panic. Let me talk to her first. Silas wanted to argue, but knew she was right. He stayed outside, one hand on his rifle, watching the street for any sign of the Crowleys. Inside the bakery, Emma Pritchard was pulling loaves from the oven. She was young, maybe 19, with blonde hair tied back and hands scarred from burns. When she saw Evelyn, something flickered across her face. Fear and recognition mixed together. We're closed, Emma said quickly. I'm not here for bread. Evelyn approached slowly, hands visible. My name's Evelyn Hart. Caroline sent me. Emma went very still. I don't know anyone named Caroline. Yes, you do. She works at the saloon. Garrett Crowley hurt her the same way he hurt you. I don't know what you're talking about. Emma, you need to leave. Emma's voice rose. Right now, before someone sees you here. We're trying to stop him, but we need your help. I can't. Emma's hands shook. You don't understand. The Crowleys, they own everything. My aunt works for them. My cousin lives on their land. If I say anything, my whole family suffers. Evelyn stepped closer. What about the next girl? And the one after that? How many more before someone stands up? That's not my problem. It is when you're the only one who can stop it. Emma turned away, gripping the counter. He told me nobody would believe me. Said I was just a stupid farm girl who should be grateful for the attention. Said if I talked, he'd make sure I never worked again. He can't hurt you if he's in prison. Prison? Emma laughed bitterly. Men like Garrett don't go to prison. They buy judges, bribe sheriffs, make problems disappear. You think testimony from girls like us matters? It does if we get a federal marshal involved. Emma turned slowly. Federal? A marshal named Jonah Reeves works out of Cheyenne. He investigates corruption in territories where local law can't be trusted. Evelyn pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Caroline already wrote her statement. 2 other girls are willing to testify. We just need you. Emma stared at the paper like it might bite her. What happens if I say yes? We take your statement, ride to Cheyenne, present the evidence, and watch Garrett's empire crumble. And if it doesn't work, Evelyn met her eyes. Then at least we tried. At least those girls know someone fought for them. Emma was quiet for a long time. Outside, voices drifted past the bakery. A wagon rattled down the street. The world kept moving, indifferent to the choice being made in this small room. He destroyed me, Emma whispered finally. Every day I wake up and I'm still there. Still in that room, still feeling his hands on me, still hearing him laugh. I know. How could you possibly know? Evelyn pulled up her sleeve, revealing old scars that circled her wrist like rope burns. Because I spent 8 years married to a man who did the same thing, and I lived in that room for so long I forgot there was a world outside it. Emma's eyes widened. What happened? I killed him, ran, and spent over a year looking over my shoulder, waiting for his family to find me. Evelyn lowered her sleeve. I'm tired of running, Emma. Tired of letting men like that win. So I'm fighting back, and I'm asking you to fight with me. Emma's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm scared. Me too, but we're scared together, and that makes us stronger than he is. It took another 10 minutes, but Emma finally nodded. She wrote out her statement in careful handwriting, detailing months of abuse at the Crowley estate. The words were raw and horrible. Evelyn read them and felt rage burning in her chest like swallowed fire. Thank you, Evelyn said when Emma finished. Will it be enough? It has to be. They left the bakery with Emma's statement folded carefully in Evelyn's saddlebag. Silas was exactly where she'd left him, face pale with pain but alert. He read the relief in her expression and relaxed slightly. She talked? She talked. Good. Let's get the hell out of this town before, well, if it ain't the big woman and the crippled rancher. Garrett Crowley stepped out of the alley beside the bakery, flanked by his brothers. All three carried rifles. All three wore expressions that said they'd been waiting. Silas's hand dropped to his pistol, but his injured shoulder made the movement clumsy. Garrett laughed. Easy there, old man. Wouldn't want you hurting yourself. He shifted his attention to Evelyn. Been hearing interesting stories about you. Visiting girls around town, asking questions, making people nervous. Just being neighborly, Evelyn said flatly. That's so. Garrett took a step closer. Because from where I stand, it looks like you're sticking your nose where it don't belong. And that's a good way to get hurt. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice. His smile didn't reach his eyes. This valley works a certain way. People know their place. They don't cause trouble. And they sure as hell don't go spreading lies about respectable families. What if they're not lies? Garrett's expression darkened. Careful. Or what? You'll burn down another barn, forge another debt, hurt another girl? The street went quiet. People who'd been walking stopped and stared. Shopkeepers appeared in doorways. Everyone sensed violence brewing like a storm about to break. Garrett's hand moved toward his rifle. But before he could raise it, a gunshot cracked through the air. Everyone froze. Evelyn stood with her pistol drawn, smoke curling from the barrel. The bullet had struck the dirt 3 inches from Garrett's boot. Next one goes through your kneecap, she said calmly. Then the other one. Then maybe I work my way up. See how long it takes before you beg. Garrett stared at her. For the first time since Silas had known him, fear flickered across the man's face. Real fear. Not of the gun, but of the woman holding it. Of the absolute certainty in her eyes that said she would pull the trigger without hesitation. You're crazy, Garrett said slowly. No, just tired of your bullshit. Evelyn cocked the hammer. Now walk away, take your brothers, and tell yourself whatever story you need to sleep tonight. But know this, you come near us again, you threaten anyone we care about, and I will put you in the ground. That's not a threat. It's a promise. Garrett backed up a step. Then another. His brothers followed, rifles lowered, eyes wide. They'd expected compliance, expected fear. Instead, they'd found someone who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to lose. This ain't over, Garrett called as they retreated. I know, Evelyn said. But when it is, you'll be the one in chains. The Crowleys disappeared around the corner. The street slowly came back to life. People whispered and pointed. Evelyn holstered her pistol with steady hands. We need to leave, she said quietly to Silas. Right now. They rode hard for 2 hours before stopping to rest the horses. Silas's shoulder was screaming, vision blurring from pain. Evelyn made him drink water and eat jerky, even though his stomach rebelled. That was stupid, he said between bites. Which part? Threatening Garrett in front of half the town. Would you rather I let him shoot you? I'd rather we didn't make him more dangerous than he already is. Evelyn checked her pistol's ammunition. He was always going to come after us, Silas. Drawing a line just means we know where we stand. And where's that? At war. She looked at him. Which means we need to reach Cheyenne before Garrett rallies his forces. How far? 100 miles. 3 days hard riding if we don't stop. Can you make it with that shoulder? Silas gritted his teeth. I'll make it. They pushed on through the afternoon and into the evening, following old trading roads that cut through pine forests and rocky hills. Silas felt every mile in his bones. His shoulder throbbed, his back ached, sweat soaked through his clothes despite the cold. But he didn't complain. Evelyn rode ahead, scanning for threats, rifle across her lap. She looked like something out of a legend, a warrior woman carved from stone and fury. Silas found himself staring at her back, wondering how someone so strong could also be so broken. They camped that night in a shallow ravine hidden from the road. No fire. Cold dinner. Evelyn took first watch while Silas tried to sleep, but pain kept dragging him back to consciousness, shoulder screaming every time he shifted position. Around midnight, Evelyn woke him. Someone's coming. He sat up, instantly alert despite the exhaustion. How many? 3 riders, maybe a mile back. Garrett? Probably. Silas cursed. How'd they track us in the dark? They know where we're heading, only one road to Cheyenne this time of year. She checked her rifle. We can try to outrun them, but your shoulder won't make it. I know. He struggled to his feet. So we stand and fight. 3 against 2, and you can barely hold a gun. Got any better ideas? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Yeah, we hide, let them pass, then double back and take a different route. That adds 2 days. Better than dying tonight. Silas wanted to argue, but his body was already failing. He could feel it, the weakness spreading from his shoulder through his entire right side. If it came to a gunfight, he'd be useless. All right, he said. We hide. They led the horses deeper into the ravine and found a cluster of boulders large enough to conceal them. Then they waited, weapons ready, listening to the night sounds. The riders appeared 20 minutes later, 3 dark shapes moving along the road. Moonlight glinted off rifle barrels. Silas held his breath, watching through a gap in the rocks. It was Garrett and his brothers. He could tell by the way Garrett sat his horse, arrogant, relaxed, like he owned the world. They rode past the ravine without slowing, voices carrying in the quiet. Tracks end here somewhere. Can't have gone far. Find them by morning. Then they were gone, swallowed by darkness and distance. Silas exhaled slowly. They'll figure out we doubled back, he whispered. By then, we'll have a head start. Evelyn stood. Come on, we move now while they're ahead of us. They rode through the night, retracing their path before cutting west onto a narrow trail that wound through the mountains. It was slower, rougher, and would add at least 2 days to the journey. But it was safer. Dawn found them high in the rocks, overlooking a valley still wrapped in mist. Silas swayed in his saddle, barely conscious. Evelyn called a halt and helped him down. You're burning up, she said, pressing a hand to his forehead. It's fine. It's infected. Your shoulder's infected. She unwrapped the binding and hissed at what she saw. The skin around the joint was red and swollen, radiating heat. We need to clean this. Now. No time. Make time. You die of fever, none of this matters. She built a small fire in a sheltered spot and heated water in their single pot. Then she made Silas drink whiskey until his head swam while she cleaned the wound. The pain was indescribable. He bit down on leather again and tried not to scream. Almost done, Evelyn said, voice tight. Just hold on. She packed the wound with clean cloth and rewrapped his shoulder. By the time she finished, Silas was shaking uncontrollably. She wrapped him in both their blankets and made him sleep. He woke hours later to find her sitting nearby, rifle across her knees, watching the trail behind them. The sun was setting. They'd lost most of a day. How do you feel? She asked without turning. Like hell. Good. That means you're alive. She stood and handed him water. Drink. Then we ride. We've got maybe 4 hours before dark. Evelyn, don't. She finally looked at him. Don't thank me. Don't apologize. Just heal, because I can't do this alone. They rode through this twilight, pushing deeper into the mountains. Silas's fever broke sometime after midnight. By dawn of the third day, they finally saw Cheyenne spread across the plains below, a sprawling frontier town built on railroad money and cattle trade. Almost there, Evelyn said. Silas managed a weak smile. You said we'd make it. I'm usually right. They rode into Cheyenne as the sun climbed higher, exhausted and filthy and alive. The federal marshal's office sat on the main street, a solid brick building with bars on the windows and a flag hanging limp in the still air. Evelyn helped Silas down from his horse. His legs barely held him. You ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. They walked through the door together carrying 3 written testimonies, a forged debt document, and the fragile hope that justice still existed somewhere in this broken world. A clerk looked up from his desk. Help you? We need to see Marshal Reeves, Evelyn said. It's urgent. The marshal's busy. You can leave it. It's about Garrett Crowley, and it can't wait. The clerk's expression changed. Wait here. He disappeared through a back door. Silas leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Evelyn stood straight despite her exhaustion, hand steady on the documents that might destroy an empire. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. A man emerged, tall, graying hair, face weathered by years of hard duty. He wore a marshal's star and carried himself like someone who'd seen too much evil to be surprised by anything. I'm Jonah Reeves, he said. You've got information on Garrett Crowley? Evelyn handed him the statements. Everything you need to put him away for the rest of his life. Reeves read in silence. His expression never changed, but his jaw tightened with each page. When he finished, he looked at them both. These girls willing to testify in federal court? Yes. And you can prove the debt documents forged? Silas pushed off the wall. My wife never borrowed money from the Crowleys, never would have. That signature's fake, and I can prove it. Reeves folded the papers carefully. This is going to cause problems. The Crowleys have friends in high places. I don't care, Evelyn said. Those girls deserve justice. Justice and law aren't always the same thing, ma'am. Then make them the same. Reeves studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled grimly. All right, I'll need you both to make official statements. Then I'm writing to Ridgemont with a federal warrant. If what you're saying is true, Garrett Crowley's done. Silas felt something loosen in his chest. Hope. Real hope. Thank you, he said hoarsely. Don't thank me yet. Reeves opened the door to his office. This kind of fight gets bloody before it gets better. You two prepared for that? Evelyn and Silas looked at each other. They'd already lost a barn, nearly died in a fire, and ridden 100 miles through mountains while being hunted. They'd faced fear and pain and the crushing weight of impossible odds. Yeah, Evelyn said. We're prepared. Reeves nodded. Good. Then let's bring down a monster. They spent 2 days in Cheyenne giving statements, signing affidavits, and watching Marshal Reeves assemble a case that could crack the Crowley Empire wide open. Silas's shoulder improved enough that he could move without wanting to scream. Evelyn barely slept, pacing the hotel room like a caged animal waiting for the trap to spring. On the morning of the third day, Reeves knocked on their door with 6 federal deputies behind him. All of them were armed. All of them looked like they'd seen their share of range wars. We ride in an hour, Reeves said. I want you two to stay here. Like hell, Silas said immediately. This is federal business now. You've done your part. That's my ranch Garrett's trying to steal. I'm coming. Reeves studied him for a long moment. You ride with us? You follow my orders. No heroics, no revenge. We do this by the book, or we don't do it at all. Understood? Silas nodded reluctantly. Evelyn stepped forward. What about the girls? Caroline, Emma, the others. They'll need protection when Garrett figures out what's happening. Already arranged. Reeves pulled out a telegram. I've got 2 deputies heading to Ridgemont now to bring them to a safe house. They'll stay there until the trial. And if Garrett runs? He won't. Men like him never think they'll actually face consequences. He'll fight the arrest, threaten lawsuits, call in favors, but he won't run. Evelyn didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. They'd put everything in Reeves's hands now. All they could do was trust the system would work. The ride back to Ridgemont took 2.5 days. Reeves set a brutal pace, stopping only to rest the horses. They rode in silence mostly, 8 grim-faced men with federal authority and enough firepower to start a small war. Silas watched the landscape roll past and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Garrett had money, connections, a small army of ranch hands loyal to the family. Even with federal warrants, arresting him wouldn't be simple. On the second night, camped in the same ravine where they'd hidden from the Crowleys, Evelyn found Silas sitting apart from the others, staring at the stars. "Can't sleep?" she asked, settling beside him. "Thinking. About? What happens after, if Reeves actually pulls this off, if Garrett goes to prison and the ranch is safe?" He glanced at her. "What then?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Haven't let myself think that far ahead." "You could stay at the ranch. Keep working with me." "As what? Hired help?" "As a partner." The words came out rougher than he intended. "Equal shares, equal say. Everything split down the middle." She turned to look at him fully. "Why?" "Because I can't run that place alone. Because you've earned it. Because—" He stopped, frustrated with his own inability to say what he meant. "Because you belong there, simple as that." Evelyn's eyes glistened in the firelight. "Nothing about this is simple, Silas." "I know. But maybe it doesn't have to be complicated either." She opened her mouth to respond, but one of the deputies called out that it was time to move. The moment passed. They mounted up and rode through the darkness toward whatever waited in Ridgemont. They reached the valley just before dawn on the third day. Reeves sent 2 deputies ahead to secure the girls while the rest of them rode straight for the Crowley estate, a massive ranch house on a hill overlooking half the territory. Cattle grazed in pastures that stretched for miles. Barns and outbuildings dotted the landscape like chess pieces. "Impressive," one of the deputies muttered. "Blood money," Evelyn said flatly. "Every acre bought with stolen land and ruined lives." Reeves raised his hand, signaling a halt a 1/4 mile from the main house. "Roberts, Thompson, circle around back. Nobody leaves. Williams, Chen, watch the barn. Rest of you with me. We do this clean." They approached the house just as the sun broke over the mountains. A ranch hand spotted them and ran inside shouting. By the time they reached the front porch, Garrett Crowley stood in the doorway with his father, a white-haired man who looked like he'd been carved from the same poisonous wood as his son. "Marshal Reeves," the elder Crowley said smoothly. "To what do we owe this unexpected visit?" Reeves dismounted and handed over the warrant. "Garrett Crowley, you're under arrest for multiple counts of sexual assault, extortion, fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to—" "This is ridiculous," Garrett interrupted, but his voice had lost its usual arrogance. "I don't know what lies these people told you, but—" "Save it for the judge," Reeves nodded to his deputies. "Take him." That's when everything went wrong. Garrett's hand dropped to his pistol. His father shouted something. Suddenly there were ranch hands pouring out of the barn, all of them armed. Reeves' deputies drew their weapons. For a frozen moment, everyone stood with guns raised and fingers on triggers. "Don't be stupid," Reeves said calmly. "You're outnumbered, and this is federal business. Stand down." "You're on my land," the elder Crowley snarled. "And no 10-star marshal tells me what happens on my land." "Your land won't matter much when you're in a federal prison for obstruction." Reeves' voice hardened. "Last chance. Tell your men to lower their weapons, or we drop every single one of them." The standoff stretched. Sweat ran down faces. Horses shifted nervously. Silas's heart hammered against his ribs. This was going to turn into a bloodbath. Then Garrett made his move. He drew his pistol and fired at Reeves. The shot went wide, but it was enough. Chaos erupted. Deputies returned fire. Ranch hands dove for cover. Someone screamed. Silas saw Garrett running for the barn and acted on instinct. He spurred his horse forward, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and cut Garrett off before he could reach cover. They collided hard. Both men went down in the dirt. Garrett recovered first, swinging a wild punch that caught Silas in the jaw. Stars exploded across his vision. He rolled away as Garrett pulled a knife from his boot. Should have left when you had the chance, old man, Garrett panted. Silas backed up, reaching for his own knife with his good hand. They circled each other while gunfire cracked around them. Garrett lunged, blade flashing. Silas barely dodged, feeling the knife slice through his shirt. Then Evelyn was there. She came out of nowhere, tackling Garrett from the side and driving him face first into the ground. The knife flew from his hand. Before he could recover, she had her knee on his spine and her pistol pressed against the base of his skull. "Move and I scatter your brains across your father's lawn," she said quietly. Garrett froze. The gunfire was already stopping. The ranch hands had surrendered once they realized they were fighting federal deputies. 2 of Crowley's men lay wounded. One of Reeves's deputies clutched a bleeding arm, but everyone else was intact. Reeves walked over and looked down at Garrett pinned beneath Evelyn. "That was stupid." "Go to hell," Garrett spat. "You first." Reeves nodded to his men. "Get him up, shackles and chains. I want him secured before we move." They hauled Garrett to his feet and bound him tightly. His father started shouting about lawyers and judges and political connections, but Reeves ignored him. Within 20 minutes, both Crowleys were in custody along with 3 ranch hands who'd fired on federal officers. Silas stood there watching it all unfold, barely believing it was real. After months of fear and violence, Garrett Crowley was finally in chains. The monster who'd terrorized the valley was being loaded into a prison wagon like common trash. Evelyn appeared beside him, holstering her pistol. Her hands trembled slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah, you?" "Better now." She watched the wagon roll away. "Think he'll actually stay locked up?" "Reeves seems to think so." "Men like Garrett usually find a way out." "Not this time." Silas turned to face her. "You saved my life." "Again." "We're even then. You saved mine first." "I didn't do much except give you a place to sleep." Evelyn smiled faintly. That was enough. They stood there in the morning sun while deputies secured the crime scene and documented evidence. The Crowley empire was crumbling in real time. Ranch hands scattered. Cattle wandered unattended. The great house on the hill looked smaller somehow, like removing Garrett had deflated the whole operation. Reeves walked over, wiping blood from a cut on his cheek. "Well, that was messier than I hoped, but we got him." "What happens now?" Silas asked. "Trial. Probably in Denver since the local courts are compromised. With the testimony we've got, Garrett's looking at 20 years minimum. His father too for obstruction and conspiracy." Reeves glanced at the estate. "Federal court will probably seize the property, auction it off to pay victims, and settle the forged debts." "What about my ranch? The promissory note?" "That document's evidence now. Once we prove it's forged, the debt disappears. Your land's safe." Reeves extended his hand. "You two did good work. Most people wouldn't have had the guts to stand up to the Crowleys." Silas shook his hand. "We didn't have much choice." "There's always a choice. You made the right one." After Reeves and his deputies left with their prisoners, Silas and Evelyn rode slowly back toward Ridgemont. The valley looked different somehow, cleaner, like a wound that had finally been lanced and could start healing. They stopped at the general store to buy supplies. William Hendricks looked up as they entered, and his eyes went wide. "Heard about what happened," he said quietly. "Whole town's talking. Is it true? Garrett's really arrested." "It's true," Silas confirmed. "And the girls? The ones who testified?" "Safe. Under federal protection until the trial." Hendricks shook his head slowly. "Never thought I'd see the day. Crowley's owned this valley for 40 years, felt like they always would." "Things change," Evelyn said. "Sometimes you just have to push them along." They loaded their supplies and prepared to leave. As they stepped onto the porch, a woman approached. Caroline's mother, the one who'd brought her daughter to the ranch seeking protection. "Miss Hart," she said, voice thick with emotion, "I wanted to thank you for what you did for Caroline, for all of them." "I didn't do much," Evelyn replied. "Your daughter's the brave one. She's alive because you gave her hope. That's everything." The woman pressed a folded handkerchief into Evelyn's hand. "My mother made this. It's all I have to give, but I want you to have it." Evelyn stared at the simple embroidered cloth, clearly fighting tears. "I can't." "Please, let me thank you properly." Evelyn nodded, unable to speak. The woman squeezed her hand and walked away. Silas watched Evelyn carefully fold the handkerchief and tuck it into her pocket like it was made of gold. "You all right?" he asked. "I spent a year running and hiding. Felt like I didn't matter, like I was just damaged goods nobody wanted." Her voice cracked. "And now someone's thanking me for helping, for mattering." Silas stepped closer. "You always mattered, Evelyn. You just needed to believe it yourself." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. The burned barn was still a ruin, but the house stood solid. The horses grazed peacefully. Everything else could be rebuilt. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Walter Boone showed up with a bottle of whiskey and a serious expression. "Heard you two caused quite the commotion," he said, settling into a kitchen chair. "Could say that," Silas replied. Walter poured 3 glasses. "Also heard about the barn, and the forged debt, and the whole mess with the Crowleys." He slid a glass to Evelyn, then Silas. "Which brings me to why I'm here." "Walter, oh, let me finish?" The old rancher took a drink. "You're going to lose this ranch, Silas. Not to Garrett, but to reality. That forged debt might be gone, but you've still got real debts, bank loans, unpaid taxes, 3 years of neglect. Without that barn and your stored feed, you won't make it through next winter." Silas felt his stomach drop. "I can rebuild." "With what money? You're broke. The cattle market's terrible, and you're one man with a busted shoulder trying to run an operation that needs 3 hands minimum." "Then what do you suggest?" Walter looked between them. "I suggest you let me buy this ranch." "What?" "Hear me out. I buy the property, pay off your debts, clear the title. Then I place it in a trust with you and Miss Hart as equal beneficiaries and managers." He pulled out papers from his jacket. "You two run the ranch together, split profits equally. If either of you wants out, the other buys them out at fair market value. If you both agree, you can sell, but the land stays protected." Evelyn frowned. "Why would you do that?" "Because Sarah was like a daughter to me. Because I'm too old to work my own land properly. And because you two are too stubborn to admit you need each other." Walter's eyes were sharp. "I've got money and no heirs. This way, the land stays productive and you both have security." Silas stared at the papers. It was a lifeline, a way to keep the ranch without drowning in debt. But it also meant binding himself to Evelyn legally, permanently. "What if it doesn't work out?" he asked quietly. "Between us." "Then you figure it out like adults. But I've seen how you two move around each other, how you fight together, how you trust each other without even realizing it." Walter smiled. "You're already partners. This just makes it official." Silas looked at Evelyn. She met his gaze steadily, that same steel-gray intensity that had stopped him from pulling the trigger months ago on his porch. "What do you think?" he asked her. "I think Walter's right about all of it." She took a breath. "I think we make a good team. And I think I want to stop running." Something warm unfurled in Silas's chest. "Then I guess we're partners." Walter grinned and pushed the papers across the table. "Sign here, both of you." They signed. Walter countersigned as witness. Just like that, the ranch had new life, new purpose, new possibility. After Walter left, Silas and Evelyn sat at the kitchen table in silence. The weight of what they'd just agreed to hung in the air like smoke. "So," Evelyn said finally. "Partners." "Partners," Silas agreed. "We should probably figure out sleeping arrangements. Can't stay in the spare room forever." "Why not?" "Because it's barely big enough for a bed. And winter's coming. House needs work before then." Silas rubbed his face. "We could build an addition, add another bedroom, maybe expand the kitchen while we're at it. Or," Evelyn hesitated, "or we could just share the main bedroom, like adults. No expectations, just practical." The suggestion hung between them. Silas felt his heart kick against his ribs. "Evelyn, I'm not asking for romance. I'm just tired of tiptoeing around this." She met his eyes. "I care about you, more than I should, more than I wanted to, and I think you feel the same." "I do." "So maybe we stop pretending we're just business partners and admit there's something else here." Silas stood slowly and crossed to where she sat. He took her scarred hands in his. "I loved my wife," he said quietly. "Loved her with everything I had. And when she died, I thought that part of me died too. Silas, but then you showed up, half frozen and stubborn and strong, and you brought me back to life without even trying. His voice roughened. I don't know what this is between us. Don't know if it's love or need or just two broken people finding shelter. But I know I don't want to lose it. Evelyn stood, closing the distance between them. Then don't. She kissed him. It was awkward at first, both of them out of practice, both carrying damage. But then it deepened into something real, something that tasted like hope and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered, not as hired help, not even as a partner, just stay. Where else would I go? Evelyn smiled through tears. This is home. The word settled over them like a blessing. Home. Not a place to run from or hide in, but a place to belong. That night, they slept in the same room for the first time. Nothing happened beyond sleep. They were too exhausted, too emotionally wrung out. But Silas woke once in the darkness and saw Evelyn sleeping beside him, face peaceful for the first time since he'd known her. He thought about the stranger who'd appeared in the blizzard, the woman who'd saved his ranch and his life, the partner who'd fought beside him against impossible odds, and he realized he'd been wrong about so much. Sarah's death hadn't ended his story. It had just closed one chapter. Evelyn had opened a new one, messy and uncertain and full of possibility. In the morning, they woke to news that Garrett Crowley had been formally charged with 14 counts of assault, extortion, and fraud. His father faced 5 years for conspiracy and obstruction. The trial was set for September in Denver. Caroline, Emma, and 2 other girls had given detailed testimony. Marshal Reeves had found 3 more victims willing to come forward. The case against Garrett was airtight. Over the next few weeks, the valley transformed. The federal court seized Crowley properties and began auctioning them off. Small ranchers who'd been crushed under Crowley debts suddenly found relief. Water rights were redistributed fairly. The corrupt sheriff was removed and replaced with someone honest. And through it all, Silas and Evelyn worked. They rebuilt the barn with help from neighbors who showed up unasked. They planted gardens, fixed fences, bought new cattle. Slowly, the ranch came back to life. On a warm evening in late May, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley. Evelyn leaned against Silas's good shoulder, his arm around her waist. Think we'll make it? She asked. Through winter? Through everything. Silas looked at the land spreading before them, acres of possibility, hard work, and earned peace. Yeah, I think we will. Even when things get hard? Especially then. He kissed the top of her head. We've already survived the worst. Everything else is just weather. Evelyn laughed softly. That's a terrible metaphor. Don't care. It's true. They sat in comfortable silence while stars began appearing overhead. Somewhere in the valley, people were rebuilding their lives. Girls who'd been silenced were finding their voices. A community poisoned by fear was learning to breathe again. And on a small ranch on the edge of everything, 2 damaged people had found something neither expected. Not perfection, not easy happiness. Just partnership. Trust. And the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Summer arrived in the valley like a promise kept. Green replaced the gray and brown of winter's aftermath. Wildflowers bloomed across the hillsides. The new barn rose from the ashes of the old one, built stronger this time with help from neighbors who remembered what it meant to stand together. Silas's shoulder healed slowly, leaving him with a permanent ache when storms rolled in. He didn't mind. Every twinge reminded him he was alive, that he'd survived, that he'd chosen to fight instead of fade away into the bottle in grief. Evelyn transformed the garden behind the house into something Sarah would have been proud of. Tomatoes, beans, squash, herbs, all of it thriving under her rough hands. She sold produce at the weekend market in town, and people started calling it the best in the valley. The money wasn't much, but it was theirs, earned honestly, built from dirt and sweat. They fell into rhythms without planning them. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise. Evening walks checking fences and counting cattle. Nights sitting by the fire while Evelyn read aloud from newspapers and Silas whittled pieces of wood into nothing useful. Just the act of creating something with his hands felt good. But the easy parts only told half the story. Living together meant seeing everything. The nightmares that still woke Evelyn screaming some nights. The days Silas couldn't get out of bed because grief ambushed him without warning. The arguments over stupid things like how to stack firewood or whether to plant corn in the north field. The silences that felt too heavy. The fear that maybe this was all temporary. That one morning Evelyn would wake up and remember she was supposed to be running. 3 weeks after Garrett's arrest, Silas found her in the barn at 2 a.m, saddling her horse with shaking hands. "Going somewhere?" he asked quietly from the doorway. Evelyn froze. "I can't sleep." "So you're leaving?" I need to ride. Clear my head." Silas stepped into the barn. "You packed a saddlebag." She didn't answer. Her hands fumbled with the cinch. "Evelyn, look at me." She turned slowly. Even in the darkness, he could see the fear in her eyes, raw and honest. "I don't know how to do this," she said, voice breaking. "I don't know how to stay in one place, how to trust that it won't get ripped away, how to be someone's partner when I spent 8 years being someone's punching bag." "So you run." "It's what I know." Silas crossed to her and carefully took the reins from her hands. "Running kept you alive. I'm not saying it was wrong, but you're safe now. Garrett's in prison, his family's ruined, nobody's hunting you. You don't know that." "I do, because Reeves checked. He sent telegrams to Montana. Your husband's family gave up looking for you over a year ago. They don't care anymore." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Then why am I still so scared?" "Because fear doesn't just disappear when the danger does. It sticks around, makes you doubt everything." He reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "But you don't have to fight it alone anymore. What if I'm not enough? What if I can't be what you need? What if you already are?" She stared at him for a long moment. Then she collapsed against his chest, sobbing. He held her while she shook, one hand stroking her hair, the other wrapped around her broad shoulders. All the strength she carried turned liquid and poured out in gasping cries. When she finally quieted, she pulled back and looked at him. "I love you," she said. "And it terrifies me." Silas's heart clenched. "I love you too. And yeah, it's terrifying, but staying's still easier than leaving." "How do you know?" "Because I already tried leaving. After Sarah died, I locked myself in this house and left the world behind. And it nearly killed me." He took her face in his hands. "You brought me back. Let me do the same for you." Evelyn kissed him then, desperate and hungry and real. They made love in the hayloft like teenagers, clumsy and urgent and laughing when they bumped elbows or knocked over a bucket. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Afterwards, lying in the hay with her head on his chest, Evelyn said, "I'm still scared." "Good. Me too. Means we're paying attention." "To what?" "To the fact that this matters. That we matter." He kissed her forehead. "Scared means you care. And caring's worth the risk." She was quiet for a while. Then, "Okay?" "Okay what?" "Okay, I'll stay. For real this time. Not just until I get restless. Not just until something spooks me. I'll stay and we'll figure this out together. Even when it's hard?" "Especially then." They fell asleep in the hayloft and woke to the sound of Walter Boone calling from the yard. "Silas? Evelyn? You two decent?" They scrambled down, hay stuck in their hair, faces red. Walter took one look at them and grinned. "About damn time," he said. "Thought I was going to have to lock you in a room together." "What do you want, Walter?" Silas asked, trying to sound dignified and failing. "Got news from Cheyenne. Trial date's been moved up. Garrett's lawyers are trying to delay, but the judge isn't having it. Whole thing starts in 2 weeks. Evelyn's expression hardened. "The girls ready?" "Reeves says they are. Caroline especially. She's determined to make Garrett pay for what he did." "Good." Evelyn brushed hay from her shirt. "We should go. Support them." "It's a week's travel round trip," Silas pointed out. "Ranch can't run itself." "I'll watch it," Walter offered. "Got nothing but time and old bones that don't work like they used to. You two go. Be there when those girls need you." Silas looked at Evelyn. She nodded. "All right," he said. "We go to Denver." They left 3 days later with enough supplies for the journey and a letter from Caroline's mother thanking them again for everything they'd done. The ride to Denver took 6 days through mountain passes and along rivers swollen with snowmelt. They camped under stars and talked about everything and nothing. Plans for the ranch. Whether to buy more cattle or invest in sheep, if they should get a dog. What to name the barn cat that had shown up one morning and refused to leave. Small things. Normal things. The kind of conversations people had when they were building a life together instead of just surviving. Denver was massive compared to Ridgemont, a sprawling city of brick buildings, paved streets, and more people than Silas had seen in years. The federal courthouse sat in the center like a monument to order in the chaos of the frontier. Marshal Reeves met them at a hotel near the courthouse. He looked tired but satisfied. "The girls are doing well," he said. "Caroline's been rock solid. Emma too. Garrett's lawyers tried every trick to discredit them, but the evidence is too strong. We've got medical examinations, witness testimony, the forged debt documents. This isn't a question of if he's guilty, just how long he'll be locked up." "And his father?" Evelyn asked, pleading out. "Agreed to 5 years and a full forfeiture of assets in exchange for testifying against Garrett." Reeves smiled grimly. "The Crowley Empire's done. Finished. By the time this is over, that family won't own enough land to bury their own dead." The trial started on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom packed with spectators. News had spread across the territory about the rancher's son who terrorized young women for years. People came from all over to watch justice happen. Silas and Evelyn sat in the back holding hands, while Caroline took the stand. She looked small in the witness chair, young and fragile. But when the prosecutor asked her to describe what Garrett had done, her voice never wavered. She told everything. The assaults, the threats, the way he'd made her feel like dirt. Like she deserved it. Garrett's lawyer tried to rattle her, asked invasive questions about her character, her family, whether she'd encouraged his attention. Caroline never broke. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "I was 16 years old. I didn't encourage anything except his conviction." The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled for order. Garrett sat stone-faced at the defense table, but Silas saw the fear creeping into his eyes, the realization that he was actually going to lose. Emma testified next, then 2 other girls, each one adding weight to the mountain of evidence. By the 3rd day, Garrett's lawyers were scrambling. By the 5th day, they were basically begging for a plea deal. The judge wasn't interested. On the 6th day, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom exploded. People cheered. Caroline burst into tears. Emma hugged her mother. Garrett Crowley sat frozen, finally understanding that money and power couldn't save him from this. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison. No parole, no early release, a quarter-century locked in a cage for what he'd done to those girls. As deputies led Garrett away in chains, he looked back at the courtroom. His eyes found Evelyn. For just a moment, their gazes locked. She saw everything there: rage, disbelief, impotent fury at losing to people he'd thought were beneath him. Evelyn smiled. Not cruel, just satisfied. She'd promised to burn his empire down, and she'd kept that promise. After the sentencing, they found Caroline outside the courthouse with her mother and sisters. The girl looked different. Lighter, somehow. Like she'd been carrying a boulder and someone had finally helped her set it down. "Thank you," she said to Evelyn, "for believing me, for fighting." Evelyn knelt down so they were eye level. "You did the hard part. All I did was stand beside you. You did more than that. You showed me I wasn't alone, that what happened to me mattered." Caroline's voice strengthened. "I'm going to be a lawyer someday, help other girls like us, make sure men like Garrett never get away with this again." "You'll be a good one," Evelyn said. "Better than most, because you'll understand what it costs." They said their goodbyes and started the long ride home. The journey back felt different, lighter. The weight they'd been carrying for months had finally lifted. On the 3rd night, camped beside a river under a sky full of stars, Silas turned to Evelyn. "Marry me." She looked up from the fire, surprise flickering across her face. "What?" "Marry me. Make this official. Not just business partners or people sharing a house. Husband and wife." "Silas, I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring things out, but I also know I don't want to spend another day pretending this is temporary." He took her hand. "I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours. Legal, permanent, real." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "I'm damaged goods." You know that, right? I come with nightmares and scars and enough baggage to fill a freight car. So do I. We can be damaged together. What if it doesn't work? Then we'll fix it. Same as we fix everything else. He squeezed her hand. I'm not asking for perfect, Evelyn. I'm asking for you, all of you, forever. She was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Then she looked at him with those steel gray eyes that had stopped him from pulling the trigger so many months ago. Yes. Yes? Yes, you stubborn old rancher. I'll marry you. She kissed him hard. But if you ever call me damaged goods again, I'm sleeping in the barn. They married in late September in Ridgemont Small Church. Walter stood up for Silas. Caroline and Emma stood with Evelyn. Half the valley showed up, people whose lives had been touched by what they'd done, who'd watched them fight the Crowleys and win. The ceremony was simple. No fancy words or elaborate promises, just two people committing to stand together through whatever came next. When the preacher said Silas could kiss his bride, Evelyn grabbed him first and kissed him so hard his knees buckled. The crowd laughed and cheered. Someone played a fiddle. People danced in the churchyard until sunset. That night, back at the ranch, they lay in bed listening to the house settle around them. You ever think about how we got here? Evelyn asked quietly. Every day? If the storm hadn't hit, if I'd knocked on a different door, if you'd actually pulled that trigger. But you didn't, I didn't, and here we are. She rolled over to face him. Do you think Sarah would have approved? Of me? Of us? Silas thought about his first wife, the woman he'd loved and lost, the hole she'd left that he thought would never fill. Yeah, he said finally. She would have liked you. Probably would have been friends. She always had a soft spot for people who fought back. I miss her sometimes, Evelyn admitted, and I never even knew her, but I see her in this house, in the way you talk about her, and I want to honor that, not replace it, just add to it. You already do. Silas pulled her close. Sarah gave me the first half of my life. You're giving me the second, and I'm grateful for both. They fell asleep tangled together, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. The ranch had good seasons and bad ones. Cattle prices fluctuated. Droughts came and went. They fought sometimes. Loud arguments about money or decisions or stupid things that didn't matter. Evelyn's nightmares never fully disappeared. Silas still had days where grief ambushed him. But they built something anyway. The garden grew until it supplied half the valley with vegetables. Evelyn started teaching other women how to farm and manage land. Word spread. Soon she was consulting for ranches across the territory, helping widows and single mothers turn failing homesteads into profitable operations. Caroline kept her promise. She studied law and became the first woman attorney in the territory. She took on cases nobody else would touch, helping abused women, defending the powerless, making sure what happened with Garrett never happened again without consequences. Emma married a good man and opened a bakery in Denver. She hired girls who needed second chances and paid them fair wages. Every year on the anniversary of the trial, she sent Evelyn and Silas a basket of bread with a note that just said, "Thank you." The valley changed too. The Crowley lands were divided among small ranchers who'd been struggling. Water rights got redistributed fairly. A new sheriff took office, someone honest who actually cared about justice. Slowly, the poison that had infected the territory for decades got flushed out. 5 years after they married, Evelyn told Silas she was pregnant. He cried. She laughed at him for crying, then cried herself. They were both terrified and thrilled, too old for this probably, but determined to try anyway. Their daughter was born in spring during a thunderstorm, screaming her way into the world with her mother's strength and her father's stubbornness. They named her Sarah, after the woman who'd built the foundation they were standing on. Watching Evelyn hold their baby for the first time, Silas thought about the stranger who'd appeared on his porch during a blizzard. The woman who'd been half frozen and desperate, who'd given him a choice. Shoot her or feed her? Best decision he'd ever made was choosing to feed her, because that woman, that strong, damaged, beautiful woman, had saved his life in every way that mattered. 10 years after the trial, they received a letter from the federal prison. Garrett Crowley had died of pneumonia. No family claimed the body. He was buried in an unmarked grave outside the prison walls. Evelyn read the letter twice, then burned it in the fireplace. Feel anything? Silas asked. Relief that he can't hurt anyone else. She watched the paper curl and blacken. But mostly I just feel tired. Tired of carrying hate. Tired of letting him take up space in my head. So let him go. Just like that? Just like that. He's dead. We're alive. Our daughter's asleep upstairs. The ranch is thriving. We won. Silas pulled her close. That's the best revenge there is. Living well, being happy, building something he could never touch. Evelyn leaned into him. When did you get so wise? When I met a woman stubborn enough to teach me. They stood by the fire while snow fell outside. Their daughter slept upstairs. The ranch was secure. The valley was healing. And two people who'd been broken separately had become whole together. Years later, when travelers passed through Wyoming territory, they'd hear stories about the Mercer Ranch, about the grieving rancher who'd nearly died from loneliness, about the runaway woman who'd appeared in a blizzard, about how they'd fought a corrupt empire and won. Some of the stories were exaggerated, some were wrong, but the core truth remained. Two broken people had found each other in the darkness, had chosen to fight instead of surrender, had built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate pains. Silas never forgot the night he aimed his rifle at Evelyn's chest, how close he'd come to pulling the trigger, how different his life would have been if he had. But he didn't. He chose mercy. She chose to stay. And together they chose to build a life worth living. Not perfect, not easy, but honest and real and earned through blood and sweat and stubborn refusal to quit. On his deathbed years later, Silas looked at Evelyn's gray hair and lined face and saw the same strength that had stopped his finger on that trigger so long ago. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For knocking on my door, for being too stubborn to die, for saving me. Evelyn took his hand. You saved me first. We saved each other. Yeah, we did. He died peacefully with her holding his hand and their daughter crying quietly in the corner. Evelyn buried him next to Sarah on the hill overlooking the ranch. Two women who'd loved the same man in different ways. Two parts of his heart that had made him whole. Evelyn lived another 15 years after that. She ran the ranch with their daughter's help and never remarried. People asked why. Already had the love of my life, she'd say. Don't need another one. When she finally died in her sleep at 78, they buried her between Silas and Sarah. Three people who'd shaped the valley, who'd fought corruption and won, who'd proved that sometimes the broken pieces fit together better than anything whole. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. The barn Evelyn and Silas rebuilt still stood 100 years later. The garden she planted kept producing, and every winter when the first snow fell, someone would tell the story of the stranger who appeared during a blizzard, the woman who stood on a porch and gave a grieving man a choice. Shoot me or feed me. He chose to feed her, and in doing so, he fed himself. Sometimes salvation comes disguised as a stranger in the snow. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we almost destroy. Sometimes the greatest love stories are written by people who thought they were finished with love. Silas and Evelyn proved that broken doesn't mean worthless, that damage doesn't mean done. That two people who've lost everything can still find each other and build something that lasts. Their story became legend in the valley, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because it showed that fighting back matters, that standing up to power works, that love earned through struggle lasts longer than love that comes easy. And every time someone knocked on a stranger's door seeking shelter, people remembered the Mercers, remembered that opening that door could change everything, that choosing mercy over fear could save more than just one life. It could save two. And sometimes that's enough to change the world.